All right, the webinar has started and is being recorded. Welcome, everyone.
All right. I don't see, oh, we do have an attendee. Majeska, hello. Should I wait? I don't need to wait till our minute recorder because we have this recording and that is in place.
Correct.
But there she is anyway. Okay. Well, let's get started. We do have quorum. There are 6 of us.
Hi, Michael.
And then that is all because we heard that Jose would not be coming today. So everybody's here who we expected. Hello, everybody. It's good to see you all. We can just go ahead and start with the agenda and materials review. Do we want to change anything in the agenda? No? Okay. I'm going to just put it out there that if we get to the public comment before 5:45, I'll probably want to circle back and give that option again after, and maybe after the training topic. But I don't want to change that in the agenda officially until we get there, if that's okay. Okay, minutes approval. Were there any changes that we wanted to make to the minutes that Vicki sent out with our agenda packets? No changes.
I move that we accept the minutes as written.
I'll second.
All right. So the minutes from last month are approved.
Well, you have to first.
What?
There was a motion in a second, but you have to say all in favor.
Oh, all in favor?
Thought we did it by acclamation, by no objections. Okay.
Yeah, but you have to say that.
Okay, comments from board members and commission liaisons. So we don't have our Human Rights Commission liaison here tonight. Leah, did you go to that?
I did not. It's possible that Vicki did, but I am not sure. But no, I did not.
Okay. Also, they used to come, like we used to have a liaison that would come from them to our minutes or to our meetings. I guess I could reach out to Jose and see if he wants to set that up.
I remember I got an email from someone in their office, I think this summer, because they changed who it was, but then I haven't heard anything additional. So I will check on that, Carolyn, with staff. We'll figure it out.
Okay. It is helpful because if we don't have like if Jose's not here, then we can at least hear from them. Okay. I'm writing our turn order in the chat. And we'll start with Bill. And then each time I ask around, we'll just go down the list. So this time we'll start with Bill. For next thing, we'll start with Bernadette, etc. So do you all see the order? It's Bill, Bernadette, Alan, Clay, Michael, and Carolyn. I should have done alphabetical. I don't know what I was thinking. That's really annoying. Okay, so Bill, do you have any comments?
I just wanted to welcome everybody, and I will say I did like these 2 cases put together, and I will expound on that later in the thing why I thought they were good to go
together. I don't have much to say. Sorry, I missed last month, but I'm here now. Still looking forward to maybe being in person one of these months.
Alan, we can't hear you.
There you go. I pushed the button, but it didn't cooperate. I have nothing by way of introduction other than to say happy to be here. Hope everyone's well and looking forward to the work tonight.
Yeah, likewise, I'm happy to be here. It's my first official meeting, so nice to participate in a real way today. And I look forward to the discussion. Yeah.
So that must mean the pause must mean we're at me. I was desperately trying to find the minutes from the last police commission meeting because every month the same thing happens. I forget that I have to do a police commission report at this meeting, then I forget I have to talk about the CRB at the other one. I know it was really interesting. I know that the chief had something really interesting to say. Leah, can you give me a keyword to remind me?
I'm gonna look those up too, Michael. I don't-
Yeah. So I don't have anything. I don't have any opening comments aside from the fact that I wish that I was better at remembering that I have to prepare, like not just read the files for these meetings, but also like review what we did in the police commission last month for these meetings.
Thanks. If something comes to you, you can always add it at the end of the meeting, or if Leah finds something in the minutes that is pertinent. Thanks for doing that, Michael. Thanks for going to that meeting. It's good to have representation. I don't have anything to add other than just, it's good to see you all. And Clay, I'm glad you're officially onboarded and ready to go tonight. Leah?
Sorry, my computer went very strange, but so Michael, I pulled up the agenda and there was a discussion about the bias crimes annual report. And then the chief also talked about the Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police and how they're implementing legislative changes. Were those two the things you were?
That's right. It was about the state bills and all
That was
this coming down the line. So there's a lot. There's a lot in this at the state level right now that is being looked at like a lot. Obviously, most of it will not make it into law, but the chief seems pretty. He seems pretty confident. I would say that of the things that are going to make it into law, they're mostly things that Eugene is already on top of. Most of the legislative actions seem to be in response to Portland, which is probably unsurprising since they're by far the largest city. But yes, and he's also chief or president of the Oregon Chiefs of Police.
I think he's vice president.
Vice president.
To be.
Yeah, so that's happening.
My computer went weird too. Okay, so it's time for public comment. I guess, should we open it or should we wait till after the training topic? But then that also begs the question, Sean, are you ready to do the training topic even though it looks like you're driving?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, but now we can't see you.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna pull into a parking lot and park, so yes, I'll be completely ready.
Okay.
I
Carol,
figured,
oh, sorry, Sergeant Marsh.
no, go ahead.
I think we should offer it to public comment because there's the possibility. And that's my suggestion.
That's what I was thinking too.
Okay, sorry, I'll stop.
But I don't want to rush ahead into the training if he wasn't ready either. So, oh, we do have a hand. So that is wonderful. So Leah, do you want to do the little spiel?
Of course, I think my spiel is how to dial in, so we don't need to do that. So Majeska, you have 3 minutes for, and I think I need to allow you to talk, so I'm going to do that. So you should be able to speak. Oh, you're muted. Nope, now you're unmuted.
Hi, everybody. I guess first I need to ask a question. I'm sorry I haven't been following your meetings well enough to know the answer, but I'm wondering about what's upcoming when the governor's office no longer is requiring the public recording and access to your meetings. I know a few months back, Leah said something about she'd be bringing a motion or something about that, but she didn't say what. And I just wonder where that stands and what are you expecting? I guess maybe I should finish my public comment first before expecting an answer. I had been a proponent for years of you all recording your meetings and making those publicly accessible, and really appreciate how well that seems to have been working out under the governor's order. And I hope that under Leah's auditorship, that's something that she'll want to continue, and that you as a commission will want to continue that. And so I would like to hear any update on that. Thank you.
I do remember that we did talk about it, and I think we kind of tabled it until it became an issue. That's, I think, where it was left, that since we are doing Zoom, and as long as we do Zoom, it will be continue to be released and recorded. And then I think, as far as I know, we can, I have the fly buzzing around me. We can make a decision maybe at next meeting. We could put that on the agenda to decide if we want to record them indefinitely, or do we want to decide right now? I don't know the process of that. Michael?
Yeah, as I recall, there was a question of whether we could still have the detailed minutes if we get recorded, if we go for recording. And I don't remember what their response was to that.
I don't remember what the response was either. I think you guys can decide, honestly. And I do want to clarify, I'm interim auditor. Just no one get ahead of themselves, because I try not to. But yeah, so we can bring this up for discussion whenever you guys want to. If you want to wait till it's an issue, that's fine. If you want to try to do it next month, that's fine. Just let me know and I can put it on the agenda. Thank you, Majeska. If you want to speak again, by the way, raise your hand. I was trying to make sure I was pushing all the buttons right, and I may have cut you off. I apologize.
So is there an answer about if we could continue to get the detailed minutes? Because I think that was important to us.
Yeah, I need to check on the cost, but I don't think that that's going to be a barrier.
Okay. Majeska has her hand up again. Are you giving her permission?
Okay, Majeska, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I personally don't see why it would have to have anything to do with the nature of your minutes. I think many people across the state have realized how good it is to have public meetings virtual, and how easy it is to record those. So I don't see that that should impact what kind of minutes you have at all. And I'd like for there to be a couple, at least 1 minute, one meeting's notice before you have a meeting at which you vote on this. Because I think although hardly anybody has picked up on this for whatever reason, it is worth some public discussion. Thanks.
Okay. Do we want to have some time next month to discuss this? Michael says thumbs up. Do we need to make a movement to add that to the agenda, or okay? So then I'll move to add this to the agenda for next month as a discussion point.
I'll second it with my thumb.
And then all in favor? Okay. All right, so Majeska, it'll be on our agenda next month. Is that's sufficient to what you're asking, right? I think you're still able to talk. Okay.
Am I still able to talk?
Yeah,
Can you hear
we
me?
can hear you.
Well, that doesn't clarify for me whether or not your actual vote on a motion would be next month or the following month.
The motion was to put it on next month's agenda, Majeska, so it'll be on next month's agenda.
Okay, thanks.
We'll
Thank you.
discuss and vote next month. Yeah. which I imagine will also still be on Zoom. So we won't get rid of the recordings before we have the discussion.
You know, we have no way of knowing whether or not any or all of you have found it to be a good experience that you'd like to continue. So people like me might have to make an issue of it when maybe there's no issue that needs to be made about it. But I know we can't have a back and forth discussion during public comments, so I'll stop.
All right, well, I think we need to move on to the training topic. So with no more public comment, we can end that part and we'll continue the discussion next month. So Leah, could you please introduce Sergeant Marsh for us?
Yes, ma'am. All right, Sergeant Marsh, you look to be in a safe position. That's very exciting. Hi, this is Sergeant Sean Marsh. He is in charge of the traffic enforcement unit. So we asked him and he kindly agreed to come and talk to you all about sort of how traffic stops and pedestrian stops are trained, what is typically a focus. Both of these cases that you're looking at tonight sort of center around traffic stops, pedestrian stops. So we figured this would be a helpful and related topic. So Sergeant Marsh, without further ado, thank you so much for coming tonight. I can tell you're working, so thank you.
I am. Can everybody hear me okay? Can people hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, we all said yes,
Okay.
just with our thumbs.
Perfect. Because, okay, well, I can't see those. So, and I'm not great on these Zoom meetings, so I apologize for that. I've been asked to speak to you guys about traffic stops, discretion, things of that nature. And I think what might be helpful before we start is if there's any specific direction that you would like me to go with it, because I could probably talk for hours on traffic stops and I only have about 20 minutes. So kind of what you're looking for would help me kind of direct or the move or the direction we go in this conversation. So anybody please speak up.
Okay, I think Bernadette, yes, please, Bernadette.
So I think the two cases tonight lead me to wonder with regards to the first one, the traffic stop, not the pedestrian stop, but with the traffic stop, if you know, the difference between the amount of time for a cover officer to be there, whether that impacts how you might engage in a traffic stop. So if you're stopping somebody on the way out towards the airport, so you're a long ways away from where maybe other officers are, will that impact your choice of how you would proceed? And then in the second case, I guess my question has to do with, in general, the discretion that specifically motor officers, because that's, I mean, traffic is only what motor officers do. Well, I shouldn't say it's the only thing motor officers do, but it seems that it's the majority of what they do. And what kind of discussion is there around the discretion that officers are given in those situations?
Perfect. Yeah, that'll give me a good place to start. So in regards to your first question, it's all based on the circumstances. Now, I can't say that if I'm on my way to the airport and I see somebody that I would like to stop, that I'm going to change how I do my stop necessarily dependent upon where a cover officer may be. There's, a lot of agencies don't have cover officers, and there's a lot of times we do traffic stops without cover officers. And if you make that stop, oftentimes it's the person you stop that dictates whether or not you need that cover officer, if you feel you need that cover officer. So it really, as far as the time, it varies so greatly that it's hard to say, at 10 minutes, we need to make sure that we're doing something different with this stop, whether there's a cover officer or not. It all is dependent upon, what you've gotten into, the types of violations. It could be, say a driving while suspended or no insurance, where you're going to actually impound the car, where you're waiting for the cover officer before you actually do the inventory of the vehicle and get the person out of it. So there's a lot of variables involved. So it's hard to give you a cut and dry answer, probably pretty much on anything you have questions about at this point. I can tell you that the traffic stops, as far as training goes, a big part of that comes from the FTOs. And as their brand new recruits are going through their field training, they spend time up the academy. They have a fairly significant chunk where they're actually practicing traffic stops, scenario type things or situations. And then it all comes back to when they're on the street with their FTOs on how they do their traffic stops and how many traffic stops they do. Some people are more inclined to do more traffic stops than others. Other people think that traffic is quote unquote a waste of their time. But in reality, it's a big part of what we do. And I'm going to kind of go right into the traffic safety unit and the motors because I supervise that team. There's a lot of discretion that's given to each officer. The members of the traffic safety unit are the officers that have always shown a propensity to work traffic. They believe in the importance of it for the safety of the community, whether it be pedestrians, bicyclists, other drivers. So their focus is traffic. And whether that's a pedestrian violating a crosswalk signal, or if it's a driver doing 75 and a 55, it doesn't matter what it is. Now, each officer has a discretion to decide whether or not they're going to issue a citation or not. I can tell you that by and large, as a motor officer, not that you don't give warnings, but you don't give warnings typically as often as patrol, because that's our main function is traffic enforcement or traffic safety. And it kind of goes back to the old adage that, you have the mom that tells the little kid, no more cookies out of the cookie jar. And the kid takes another cookie. And if you keep doing that over and over until there's a consequence, they're not going to change their behavior. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is get people to change their driving behavior to be safer. I can tell you that this is the second time I've been on the traffic team. I've been here for about 7 years now. The first time as an officer, about 5 years. My first tour on the team, there was a number of times we used to work the Ferry Street Bridge all the time. We still work it fairly regularly, but probably not quite as much. That there was a number of times that I would stop somebody in the morning for speeding. I would give them a warning and I would stop them the opposite direction in the afternoon going home. And so obviously the warnings don't work. So for us, and I say us as the motor cops, we're more likely to write a citation and take a more of an enforcement approach, because that typically has a larger impact on changing somebody's behavior. Because in reality, all we want to do is get people to follow the traffic laws and drive in a safe manner. If we could get everybody to do that and all of us be out of a job, really would be happy about that, because it's all about the safety. And when people are driving in a manner that is putting other people at risk, that's where we come into it. And if somebody's driving in that manner, we're more likely to issue a citation than give a warning, because of the danger it presents or poses to the rest of the public. It's really kind of how we look at it. And I know everybody on the traffic team they believe very strongly in traffic safety. That's why we are where we are. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other directions you want to go, or any other questions people may have as far as I can answer things for you?
Go ahead, Bill.
All right, I think I'm unmuted now. Thanks, Sergeant Marsh. I appreciate you coming tonight and talking to us. So I guess I'm going to follow along with Bernadette's question. So how often specifically, let's first talk about the motor detail, and then you could maybe make a general comment about patrol, but how often do you make traffic stops without backup or cover?
As a motor officer, it happens virtually all the time. If there happens to be another motor officer in the area or a patrol officer drives by, oftentimes they'll stop, but very rarely will the guys on the bikes ask for a cover unit, just because that's what we do. We run traffic, and unless it turns into a situation, like I said earlier, where the person you stop is giving you that feeling of things aren't just quite right, or the hairs on the back of your neck are sticking up, things that's like, I probably should have somebody else here. But generally speaking, and I couldn't tell you what the number is because I don't know, but as a general rule of thumb, we don't call for cover very often. Now, if other motors are in the area, work in that area, they'll stop by without that other motor officer actually calling for cover. And the same thing with patrol, really. And it's been a long time since I've actually worked on patrol, and as a patrol supervisor, they probably ask for cover more often. A lot of it depends on whether it's daytime versus nighttime. At nighttime, you're dealing a lot more with potentially the driving under the influence, things of that nature. And you typically always ask for cover for that because of you're getting the person out of the car and performing the FSTs. And so there's that other added factor or danger factor. So you'd ask for a cover officer. If it's generally during the day, some officers do, some officers don't. It really is dependent on how they feel that stop is going. And if you have somebody that's completely compliant, and I'll stop somebody, say, for speed, and they're like, yeah, I screwed up, I'm sorry. And, and there's no indication at all that they are going to be argumentative or hostile or anything but compliant. I don't need a cover officer. Conversely, if you stop somebody who's very argumentative and I wasn't speeding and on and on and on and on, and they're getting really agitated, I'll ask for a cover officer just to make sure I have somebody else there. If things happen to go sideways, I have another person to help me out. And we always have our body cameras going too. So.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, Sergeant Marsh. Michael Hames Garcia here. I was wondering, so there was a RAND study that just came out this summer on law enforcement traffic stops, and they, according to it, almost 50% of departments had reported that non-compliance rates had increased with traffic stops. So, driver cooperation had worsened. And I was wondering if you found something similar in your observations here in Eugene.
So what study was that?
RAND Corporation.
Okay. I haven't seen that, so I can't speak to that, obviously. And when they're saying driver cooperation, are they talking about people's changing their behavior to actually follow traffic laws, or is it in having conversations or not complying with the officer when they ask them to do things? Do you know?
Not following officer commands, or
Okay.
not responding to questions would be another one.
Yeah, I can tell you that I haven't seen a huge change in that. I mean, there's some, and it's, people ask me all the time, like, well, how is it being a cop, with everything that's going on nationally and up in Portland and all that. And typically what I tell them is, look, I said, we are very fortunate in Eugene. For one, we have a great police department. We have a lot of very dedicated officers that do the right thing. And we also have a lot of support that I think a lot of people don't realize, because they think of Eugene and it's Eugene, you're going to go find a cause there, and the protests, the anarchists and all this from years past. It's not like that. By and large, the people that we stop, and especially being on a motorcycle, is that when they get stopped with us, they pretty much expect they're going to get a ticket, just because that's the nature of what we do. But by and large, people are fairly cooperative. I mean, they don't like it, obviously, and they might be a little bit verbally hostile, is probably a strong word, but just they're not pleased with what's going on. But I haven't seen anybody that really refuses to identify themselves, provide their driver's license, insurance, things of those natures, or that nature, that it hasn't been a huge issue here. And I truly believe we're very fortunate in Eugene, based on our interaction with the community and how the community perceives us, and the support we get. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that, whether we've been working at a protest or a march or whatever else, we're always getting people saying thank you and we appreciate what you do. And I mean, obviously there's some that don't particularly like us, but that's just the nature of what we do. But I haven't seen a huge uptick in non-compliance from people.
Thank you.
If members don't have a question, I don't want to jump in on you guys. First, I think I misspoke earlier. I want to be very clear. This was Bernadette's idea. So thank you, Bernadette, for this idea, because I think it's very pertinent tonight. And number two is, Sergeant Marsh, one of the things we hear a lot at the auditor's office is they pulled me over and gave me a ticket for their quotas and to make money. And so could you clarify that issue for us?
Absolutely. Well, I can tell you that there are no quotas. And in fact, the chief and I have had some pretty in-depth conversations. In years past, it was kind of about, okay, how many tickets did the motor team write, things of that nature. It's not like that. In fact, really what his matrix on what shows we're being productive is the number of stops or the contacts we would make with people. So in reality, I could go out and make 25 stops and write 2 tickets and it wouldn't matter. And that's not our goal. Our goal is to get people to voluntarily comply and change their behavior so they're better and safer drivers. If we have that conversation with somebody that you stop them, and you can kind of get a feel on some people, it's like, yeah, and I know I screwed up and I'm really sorry, I wasn't paying attention or I didn't see that or whatever the case might be. You know, and so you're more likely to give that person a warning than you are for somebody who has the opposite reaction. But there's absolutely zero quotas for what we have to write or should write. It's just being out and making those contacts. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a traffic stop. And I'll give you an example. Is this morning, there was the chief asked us to go out to Kinsrow and Commons. There's been some issues out there and they wanted us to go out there and actually talk to the kids at bus stops. And so the whole team went out there and we're handing out stickers and talk to them. And it's more of a public service. So they see us as approachable, or if they need some help to come to us. So it's not about the ticket. And in regards to the money, a very small chunk of whatever we write per citation comes back to the city. It goes into the general fund, but it doesn't come to the police department. You know, the court has their portion, the state gets its chunk of it. But as far as coming back to us, we don't really see any of it. And for us, it's all about the traffic safety and changing people's behavior and making it safe for everybody out there.
Thank you.
I don't see a hand, but I have a question.
Okay.
Hello. What seems to be kind of the main traffic safety problems with Eugene drivers or drivers in Eugene? Is it speed or running lights, or what are some of those things that you give a lot of citations for?
Let me get my list out. You know, in reality, there's probably just a handful of things that really have an impact. Speed is one of them. I'm sure you've driven down 105 or I-5 or any of the Delta Highway or any belt line, any of those, and you see people going way over the speed limit. With the amount of the volume of traffic and the speeds that people are going, it just increases the likelihood of something really tragic happening. The other one is red light violations. We see a lot of those. Excuse me, not yielding to pedestrians. It's really roadway issues or roadway use issues, and it's just not being safe and courteous. But speed, red lights, cell phones is a huge one. You can drive down the road and see 10 people on their phones. And that's one of the things that as a traffic team, especially, we address that a lot. And typically with the cell phone violations, not always, but we're a lot less likely to issue or give a warning for that than we'll write them a citation for it, because everybody now knows you can't be on your cell phone. And it's the way they changed the law here a few years back is the first violation bumped it up to a Class B traffic violation, which makes it a $300 ticket. If they get another citation in 10 years, it bumps it up to a Class A traffic violation, which makes it a $500 ticket. And typically DMV will issue a suspension on that. And then their third or subsequent offense within that 10-year period, it makes it a misdemeanor. It's a crime. So theoretically, they could go to jail for it. And the reason they've done that is that studies have shown that driving while talking on your cell phone is as dangerous as driving while you've been drinking. You know, and that's why as I was listening, I was driving, but I knew when I was getting ready to talk, it was important that I stop and I could actually devote my attention to you guys and not be driving down the road and talking on the phone. Now, technically, is it legal? Yeah, because it's hands-free. I'm not touching it. It's on a mount, but it's just not safe. And even when I'm out working, I really try not to be on the phone. You know, there's times when I have to be, but again, it's on a mount, and there's an exception for law enforcement or for, you know, it's in the course of duty, but I really try not to, just because of the danger side of it. That was kind of a long-winded question or answer to your question. So I hope that answered it okay.
Yeah, it did, definitely. And then what about with DUIs? How many or how often do those, is that part of the top 5 or is that lower on the list?
For us, it's very low. working during the day. We don't work at night on the motorcycles. It's too dangerous. The visibility issues and what have you. I don't know what the numbers are for the department because it's been so long since I've worked nights that I know when I was working nights, I would arrest a lot of duties and everybody on my team would. I mean, it's fairly common, but I don't know what the numbers are. So I can't really answer that for you. Obviously very dangerous. And if we do stop them, we'll process them and deal with that.
Go ahead, Clay.
Hi, Sergeant Marsh. Thanks for being here. I'm wondering if you can describe any kind of communications training that is involved with the training with the officers you work with and with yourself for these kinds of stops specifically. Like, I know there must be, department-wide types of training related to that, but I'm wondering if there's special training for communications for those individual, interactions that you have on the ground on a very regular basis.
Okay. Well, like you said, there's a lot of training that the department goes through in general, and it starts early on as far as, through the academy, when they're up at the academy, when they get back through their FTOs. In-service training, we do a lot of communication type stuff and have over the years. As far as specific training for like my guys on the traffic team, we don't set up every month and say, okay, let's send, 8 hours talking about communication. Everybody who is on the traffic team are very seasoned and veteran officers. And part of the qualifications, for lack of a better term, is their ability to communicate with people. And what I've kind of over the years, I've noticed that whether you're talking about motor cops, you're talking about patrol detectives, the longer that we have been police officers or cops, and this doesn't always hold true. Obviously, there are some outliers there, but really cops have the ability to communicate well with others when they're in that right frame of mind. And so a lot of it, I think, probably goes back more to the wellness and making sure that they're in the right headspace. And we do training on that too, not specifically on our motor team, but in the department. And that's one of the big things that the chief is big on right now is talking about wellness. And because it's one of those topics that have been so taboo for so long, you can't talk about wellness. And in reality, we're all human, and it's, a bad day at home or a bad night at home and you come to work and things change or, you're not communicating as well as you should be. But I can tell you by and large, the guys on the traffic team, they're very good at communicating. Again, we're only human though, and it's, when you're having interactions with people, there's some people that I'm sure you've dealt with throughout your life that there's some people you get along well with, it's easy to talk to. And there's other people that there's nothing really specific, but you just don't communicate well. And that's the way it is with us too. There's certain personality types that don't mesh well with others. And it's not necessarily to the level of, oh, you can't talk to that person, but it's just not as easy to communicate. But as far as the specific training for the team, we don't do anything like that. I know in years past, we've gone through some of that training, but it's been a long time because everybody on the team has been there with the exception of one of my guys. He's been a cop for a number of years, but recently new to Eugene. Everybody's been there for 15, 20 years at least. So.
So this is Michael again. I'm sorry if I missed this before, but how many people do you have in the traffic team?
So I am supposed to have 7 officers and myself as a sergeant makes 8 people on the team. I currently have 2 of my officers that are on light duty from injuries. And so that makes 5. And so we're really short staffed right now. I get calls on the daily basis from citizens of talking about, complaints in their neighborhood or this and that. And I try to explain to them, so look, there's about 540 or 550 road miles in Eugene, and I have 5 officers for the entire city. There's 250 or so, give or take, signalized intersections. Again, 5 officers, you do the math and we're spread really thin. At one time, the city council allocated 2 extra spots to the traffic team, and they had dedicated funding for it. So the team was 10 total, 9 and a sergeant. And over the years, through attrition and budget cuts and, whatever else came along, when those people left, they just never refilled them. And so we're at 8 now. Like I said, in the past, we were up to 10 at one point. And in reality, for us to truly be effective, you need to double the size of our team and have 2 teams. And that would give us the ability to really go out and change people's behavior.
And so given the how thin you're stretched, what is like, do you focus on specific days and times, or how, because I'm assuming that 5 officers are not able to work 24 hours, 7 days. So.
Right. Yeah. So our schedule is either Monday through Thursday or Tuesday through Friday. And it's roughly 7 to 5. I mean, there's some variation there depending on the officer and what they've got going on. But we work during the week. We work during the day. We don't work on weekends other than overtime. And we have 3 separate grants specifically that we get from ODOT. We have a distracted driving grant. We have a seatbelt, or it's called 3 flags, seatbelt and speed enforcement. And then we have a speed grant as well. So oftentimes, we'll come in on a day off and work for 4 or 5 hours or 3 hours or whatever the case might be. Working, for like speed, we'll work Beltline or 105. The ones that don't get a lot of attention during the weekends, because typically people know that they're not going to see a motor officer out there during the weekend on a regular basis. And so they're more likely to roll the dice on whether or not they're going to get a ticket or not. But typically we're during the week and during the day.
Gotcha. Thank you. And so is there, do you have particular ways you cooperate with Lane County Sheriff's Department or Oregon State Police to also do traffic enforcement, or are they not involved with that at all?
They are, to an extent. There are 3 flags or our seatbelt grant that we get. That's a statewide, and you'll see several times a year the click it or ticket, the billboards, things of that nature. I think the county's in that one. I'm not sure if they do that one anymore. I believe they do, but OSP does it. Several of the other agencies. We don't typically work directly with them though. The county is out in the county. They don't come in the city a ton. The OSP, they're on the highways. But we have in the past done a couple of joint things with the county, and same with Springfield. We've done a couple of joint things here and there. It doesn't happen very often because everybody's kind of responsible for their own little piece of the pie, so to speak, as far as where we live and where we work.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Clay. And we should probably move on to our next agenda item. We're a little bit over, but go ahead, Clay. And
Okay, that makes sense. And you may not be able to answer this right now anyway, sorry, but I'm curious if there are statistics that are kept for stops based on race and sort of how, or other factors, and how those end up, whether there's tracking within the department specifically on traffic stops. And like I said, you may not know the answer to that immediately, so it's okay if not, but.
Yeah, I don't know where they're kept. I know that after every stop we make, whether it's a person stop, a traffic stop, we have a stops module we need to complete on our computer system. And then it tracks, race, sex, age, all those things, whether they're cited or warned or what the circumstances were, why they were stopped. Where that goes, I have no idea. That's way above my pay grade. So I don't know where, but I know that information is tracked, but I don't know what they do with it or where it lives.
Clay, that we generally have presentations on that sort of periodically from the lieutenant who does all the reporting of that. So we can schedule that at an upcoming meeting as well, because it is always of interest to our members. So thank you.
Thank you.
all right. Thank you, Sergeant Marsh, for coming and talking to us.
You're welcome.
I think probably as usual, if anyone has a question that wasn't answered, you can go ahead and reach out to Leah, and Leah can help get you in touch if you want, if something occurs to you in the middle of the night that you want to hear more about. So thank you. If you want to go, you can go and drive safely.
I will. Thanks. Have a great night, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right. Leah, can you jump right into our case review?
Of course I can. Seamless. Give me just a second. Ah. All right, can you all see that? All right, sweet. We are doing two case reviews tonight. The first is the allegation review. So that's sort of the meatier one with more video. So for our newer members that kind of do this introduction at the beginning of every case, so the people who are watching can kind of understand what on earth we're all talking about. Just a quick reminder to everyone, we avoid using identifying pronouns, obviously no names, no identifying information. That's not releasable information, so we keep it to ourselves. And you'll see I actually made a slide of all the information that is provided to you guys, just again, for the record, so people can see what all you got to see. So with that, to our first case, is an allegation of poor judgment by a supervisor during a traffic stop. So Supervisor A initiated a traffic stop. As the supervisor approached, they asked for code 1 cover. As Supervisor A contacted the driver, they noticed a large knife sticking out of the driver's thigh. It was alarming, at least when I watched it. So it was just not something you see every day. Supervisor A remained very calm and had a conversation with the driver about how the knife came to be in the leg, where the driver was going, requested medics to come and assess the driver. Driver did state that there was a gun in the back seat of the vehicle and also made a statement about you guys had shot him before. The driver sort of reached into their back pocket and got their wallet out and ultimately gave their ID to the supervisor. Supervisor, once cover arrived and medics arrived, moved around to the driver's side of the vehicle, continued to speak with the driver. Driver definitely wanted to get out of the car. I think they seemed to be uncomfortable with the knife where it was. The driver's door was opened. They prepared to exit. The driver had both hands up near the windshield. Supervisor A was reaching, you kind of down below the camera. I think in their report, they said they were reaching for, at that point, they saw a gun between the driver's seat and the door. They placed their flashlight on the roof of the vehicle. It rolled off, hit the pistol, and the gun discharged. I think as the supervisor was holding it. So it hit the ground. I believe the medics reported that they were hit by sort of ground shrapnel, but no one was seriously injured. We'll get to that, sorry. Supervisor A radioed for emergency cover, maintained control of the driver's arm. Officer B stayed on the passenger side with lethal cover, which means firearm pointed at the driver. They all sort of checked in on each other to ensure everyone was okay. No one had been hurt. Medics hadn't been hurt. Driver was ultimately removed from the vehicle, searched for weapons, placed on a gurney, and the knife fell out of their leg during this process. So fire personnel were concerned about how this was handled and reported a complaint to the chain of command that was then forwarded to us for classification. The complaint sort of centered around not securing the scene sufficiently before saying it was clear for medics, not placing the driver under arrest, and not being adequately skeptical of the driver's story about the knife. And so we reviewed reports and video and classified it as an allegation of the judgment, violation of the judgment policy, that this was not good judgment. It was recommended to be sustained by the chain of command. I ultimately did not write an adjudication memo on this because of workload issues. So as you all know, well, as most of you know, typically I would write an adjudication memo as well. In this one, I just talked to everybody a lot and wrote an email. So it's a little different than normal. So the topics for discussion are intake classification monitoring. This was somewhat unusual to get an external complaint from a partner agency. We don't get that a lot. The relevant policy is truthful. So that is a typo from the last case. It is not truthfulness, everybody. Nope, it's judgment. I apologize. I'll fix that. One thing that came up during the case was the degree of vagueness in that policy. So I brought that up as something you guys might want to talk about. And then there was an adjudication recommendation that's sustained, but I did not write a separate memo. And then these were the materials provided for your review. I will stop sharing. Yep. And let you all talk.
All right, thank you, Leah. We're going to start with Bernadette and go through the order. So Bernadette, Alan, Clay, Michael, Carolyn, then Bill. And what we'll talk about right now is the complaint intake, classification, investigation, and monitoring.
Okay, so I got this case kind of backwards in the sense that I had all of the videos to watch, but I didn't have any of the paperwork when I first started reviewing it. Leah was kind enough to bring me a thumb drive, so I was able to review the reports, but my initial was only reviewing the 24 videos that were attached that I was able to access. And after I got through several of them, the 3 to 6 minute ones of lights and sirens running down the road, only to be turned off as they got close, I finally got to the one that was obviously the one that was really necessary to watch. And I watched it. And then I watched it again because I couldn't figure out anything that was done wrong. I felt like we had just kind of watched a masterclass in de-escalation, considering so many of the other cases that we've reviewed where the officers moved too quickly. The officers didn't listen and take into account everything that was going on. I mean, just not only was it was so instructional in how the video was that, you felt like you were being taught while this was happening. That there were so many comments made to the cover officer that, the things that the supervisor saw. So then I was trying to figure out, it's like, was this judgment allegation because this officer was a supervisor, or was it just because of the situation? I'm not sure if there's really an answer to that. I mean, because I got to the point where the only thing I could think that it could be an allegation of judgment was because as a supervisor, they're supposed to be showing somebody who's only been there, the cover officer, how to do things. But given this officer's experience and training, it was hard for me to see how anything was done wrong. And so when we asked the question of Sergeant Marsh earlier about where cover officer is, and I'm sure Jason or Ryan can jump in and correct me if I get this wrong, but given that the county has 3 people on duty out there on traffic at any one time, covering a county the size of Connecticut, I think people have said, they are used to contacting people out there by themselves, knowing that they have to take care of themselves. And it's the rare time that they will get someone to come and cover them. Maybe if they're on Highway 99, just outside the city limits between Eugene and Junction City, they can call for cover from one of the cities if they think it's going badly. But so in here, we've got somebody who has a lot of experience working by themselves in the county, and the answers to the questions as to how they were talked to. Sorry, I'm getting far afield of the intake classification and what we're supposed to be talking about, but it all made me kind of wonder, it's like how this got classified as a judgment. Because I was thinking, it's like, well, what about the judgment of sending this email at 3 a.m. Complaining about something, when if you just take a break and kind of think about it and have a conversation, you got, because once the person was talked to and shown the video, they too said, oh yeah, I can see why, everything was done right. So I'm torn with the classification here that this was done. I think it would have been interesting to read an auditor's memo on it. I understand the reason for not having one, but I just felt like, this was such the opposite of so many cases that we've reviewed with regards to de-escalation. I mean, Sergeant Marsh is talking about 5 officers for 540 miles in the city of Eugene, and the county's talking about a few officers, So I question the classification of this case. And I guess mostly because I'm trying to understand still whether or not it was because they were a supervisor or just judgment in general because of the situation.
It was partially both. So I think, I mean, and if I may respond, Carolyn, I'm kind of jumping in, but I like this one. So it was one of those where I think there was a lot of discussion. Like, I spent a lot of time talking about this case and a lot of what you're saying of like, well, they were really calm and kept everything very low key. And isn't that what we want? And there was definitely that level. And then there was also but there was a gun right between the seat and the door. And the guy reached down and the driver reached down and was fiddling down there for a long time. And there was no reaction. And I think it was one of those where I really appreciated the interview with the involved employee, because we were able to get that perspective of, no, I was fully aware that that person could be reaching for a weapon. I was fully aware of all the ways this could have gone wrong. And I stayed calm regardless. And I think that was really helpful for me. I definitely went back and forth on sustaining or within policy, like several times. So I'm interested to hear what you all have to say. As you know, I don't tend to bring you ones that are easy. But it was kind of both. It was, there are all these things that are red flags in this interaction. And this supervisor is just flat. And it was a question of, is that great or is that concerning? So I don't know if that answers your question at all. It's more just, yes, that's what we talked about a lot. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's helpful. I'll have more to say in the next rounds.
I think it's me. And so, yeah, I think it's totally appropriate judgment. There was a knife sticking out of the person's leg. There was possibly 2 firearms in the car at the time of the stop. I just was kind of head scratching with all that we hear and see and read about, that response was so flat, in fact, that the fire personnel were concerned. And I think they totally had a legit, the discharge just shows how incredibly, random these events are and how firearms, can go off. And, that I don't think had anything to do with the judgment. You put your flashlight on a roof. I mean, that was really random. So to me, that has nothing to do with anything really, other than it freaked the fire personnel out. But that wasn't their complaint. Their complaint was that they were being asked to treat a guy that clearly the threat had not been, I don't think, properly assessed or neutralized sufficiently to ask them to, and just in the context of, I don't know if anyone else has watched the videos from California, fire personnel and on the highway, on the interstate, and being arrested by, there's a real kind of a thing between fire and police personnel. And I wasn't aware of whether it existed here or not. And there's an undercurrent of that, I think, in this. But I think it's a proper, it shows a good system where a complaint, that email got picked up through the EPD system and got investigated. And yeah, it is backwards. It's a backwards case, and that someone with a knife and 1 or 2 guns, in a stop, what should be kind of if not a felony stop, technically, it certainly escalated from a mere red light stop, So, all right, thank you.
Yeah, I generally agree with Alan's assessment. I think I think the supervisor was a bit cavalier with both their own safety and with the safety of their colleagues. And so that alone sort of leads me to think that an investigation of the situation seemed appropriate, and an investigation for judgment seems like the right call. So, and the other things that Alan said, I support too. I also agree I think Alan does too, that the de-escalation tactics used by the supervisor were great, and the conversation with the involved person in the vehicle were exemplary, and yet the lack of alarm from some of the sort of key facts of the case, I think are sort of why we're talking about it in terms of judgment. So yeah, I support how it was classified and brought in and investigated.
Me now. So this is intake, classification, and what's the third one?
Investigation and monitoring.
Okay, oh, so there's 4, so we're doing 4 now. So yeah, the intake, I think things happened really nicely with the flow, going from the external complaint that comes up through the chain of command at fire and then gets handed over, gets investigated. The investigation seems very thorough. As far as the classification, so I think classification as judgment, I can see. Yeah, it's I just want to, so Leah, you had mentioned in your presentation, sorry, I had this on so that I was looking at the person who was talking, but now that's me, and so I need to change this because it is very distracting. Off speaker view. You had said in your presentation that it was a pistol, but it was a revolver, which is important because it wouldn't have gone off where the hammer was back. And so when the flashlight fell, it hit the hammer, and that's what set it off. And I think that's important because it's one thing to have a gun in the well of your door and maybe to be fiddling with it. It's another thing to have a cocked hammer on a revolver in the well of your door when your hand has been down there.
Thank you.
Because that suggests to me that, especially add into that the context that this is someone who has stated that they have been shot before by law enforcement, and has, I think everyone, all the people involved in this had agreed, had probably self-inflicted the knife wound, possibly after being stopped. I think this could have gone down very differently. I think there was something very alarming that was happening that was avoided thanks to some de-escalation that people have commented on. I'll stop there because I'm moving on into adjudication, but yeah, I just think that the scenario seems much more alarming to me than it seems based on how we've been talking about it.
Okay, so I think the intake was done well. I appreciate that it came from outside EPD, but also kind of still within the realm of not law enforcement, but city. I mean, they're colleagues, right? The medics who showed up were colleagues of this person. So I appreciate the courage that it took to do that, and that it got sent your way. For classification, I felt the same thing. So there were so many complaints in that email from the medic, or the captain. I think it was a captain. I don't remember. The captain. I mean, it listed many things, like that they were too friendly with the driver. They were too okay, so that's the one that stuck out to me, too friendly, because to me that was explaining that they de-escalated the situation by being friendly and kind of having the rapport that they had that did create the de-escalation. So I actually thought that it was interesting that was a complaint, because to me, I thought that was such a well done thing. I guess until the end, because by the end, I agree that person probably should have been arrested, and you know, you can be friendly up into the point where some action needs to be taken. So that would be my only complaint about that. I think judgment was a good one, and I didn't totally understand how important the lack of judgment was until I read the captain's adjudication letter to Officer A, not the adjudication letter, the one that said you did this. That one really explained out or cleared it up for me as to why the judgment was lacking, like that they had one hand on the driver's arm and the other hand on the gun. I'm going to say gun because I don't know the difference between a pistol and a rifle, but thank you for that, Michael. Instead of having the cover officer come around and take control of the person or the gun. I thought that was a really good explanation of why judgment was lacking. And that me as a public educator here in Eugene, I wouldn't necessarily know that is how you should do it, but the explanation from the captain made that clear. And once it was explained, I was like, well, duh, that you shouldn't ever have a hand on a person and a gun. And also the threat of the knife being pulled out and used as a weapon also. Like we have many weapons that are at this person's disposal that made it a very stressful situation. So I liked the de-escalation. I thought that was really good, especially considering most of the videos I watch, I'm watching with the lens of, okay, how is this officer messing up the de-escalation? So I was ready for that to happen. So it was good to see that. I also thought it was interesting how the officer really met the driver where they were with their mood and their affect. Because the driver, despite having a knife stuck into their leg, was also very calm and very flat. And I think that was handled really well by the officer. Also by the driver. I want to give a little bit of credit to them, because if they have been shot by police officers in the past, it was probably really difficult for them to maintain, to stay de-escalated. That's an assumption I can make. The investigation was handled really well. Jason, thank you for coming back tonight to be here for this. I know that this was a long time ago. So the investigation, as usual, was really well done. And so was the monitoring. I think the only thing that I would have wanted, and I totally also understand this, would be an adjudication letter from the auditor. But I understand why there wasn't one. And I also appreciated how you said that you just would agree anyway. So in this case, I think it was appropriate. If you had disagreed, then I definitely would have been really mad at you for not doing a letter. So that's all I have to say. Bill?
Okay, thank you, everyone. So lots to talk about on this one. So I think, we got a complaint from an outside agency brought in. The classification, this had to be difficult, and I understand it. And the reason why I say that is because I personally think that the lieutenant did everything right in handling the situation, because, and so to look at, because you have to classify a complaint, and I get that. And so trying to figure out where this fit. But I think, a lot of us are taking what we learned at the end as what the officer knew in the beginning. And I think him talking to everybody calm, because the guy's a victim in his car. He has a knife in his leg. Just like if I would have had a knife in my leg, I wouldn't want the officer to pull a gun out and point it at me. I can legally have a gun in my car. This guy, he didn't know if he could legally or not have a gun in his car. Do you want him to pull his gun out and point it at him when this guy's calm? I mean, he de-escalated this. He never lost his cool. I mean, this could have went really wrong. And so we're all judging this based on that. We found out at the end that the guy has a past, but we keep talking about this, and why we have this is that we don't judge people when we walk up on them that they're a criminal, that they're bad. he's a victim. He's talking to him like a victim. He's trying to get help to him. So, I'm really lost in where his judgment was wrong on this, but I get it, Leah, you had to classify it somewhere because we have a complaint. And I don't know if it would fit anywhere else in the policy, and maybe somebody else could maybe say where that might have fit better. And so I think that's where my struggle was with the classification on this. I think the investigation was good. I think, we had lots of body camera to really show us what went on and what happened and how we dealt with all these things. And I would even say, that body camera did a lot for me, even when, the judgment about what he should have done when he did find the gun there. Well, when you're standing there and you're holding the guy's arm and there's a gun underneath you, my natural reaction would be to grab it too. I'm not going to sit there and wait for somebody else to come get it. So again, that to me was not a bad judgment, because I'm not going to let a gun sitting there when somebody else has two hands that could grab it and the other officer's on the other side. So I'll let the classification go. The investigation was good. I think it was well done, and then the procedure. So I will leave it there because the other things we'll talk about.
All right, that was everybody, I think. Started with Bernadette. So Alan, you can start us off with talking about EPD policies, practices, and training.
Well, I would just say that I get what Bill just said. Like I hear that perspective. I think the training, I think it is legal to have a firearm in the car. I think that response comes up a lot at a stop. However, this one changed immediately with the presence of the knife, and the cover officer described seeing a lot of rounds on the front. He's a victim, but he says that he had been shot prior, or they say that they had been shot prior by the police. There's just too many flags, and so I think that they're trained to get cover, which he did, and I think that ultimately the allegation of it being a judgment issue probably is all that was left. I understand the points that you just made, and so yeah, I don't have a lot to I think the department's saying it wasn't good judgment the way this particular incident was handled, and I'm not quarreling with that. So thank you.
Yeah, I think as has been mentioned, this is sort of an example of good outcomes from training in some ways, which is hard because I think also that there was some misjudgment on the supervisor's part, and so I don't want I hope that our conversations don't lead to more officers being more on edge. We're trying to be trained to be more on edge. That's not the goal, obviously, but in this case it seems like there was so much effort to try and continue de-escalation that some cues were missed. That's sort of my assessment based on the investigation. So in terms of training, I think it's a hard line probably, and it's a hard line in every hard line to follow in every one of these instances, and that's why there's so much training for our police officers. In terms of practices and policies, I think I don't have a lot of comments because I think the investigation into this incident looked at those practices and policies, and I think made a good judgment based on those as they exist. I don't think there's a lot of changes that really need to come about from that. So that's all.
So I want, well, first off, I missed having a memo from the auditor's office. I understand the reasons why. It would have been nice to have had a note in the email saying, oh, by the way, there's not an auditor's letter. So I wouldn't have spent like 20 minutes like just like looking for it and scrolling up and down and trying to figure out, why am I not seeing it? Because I just spent a lot of time looking for it. I was about ready to like say, I'm so sorry, I don't think I got it. And but it wasn't there. I think I want to divide this into, I think there's two halves to this stop. And in the first half, I don't think that there's too much de-escalation. I think that de-escalation works perfectly here because I do think that this stop was headed. I mean, I can't remember the number from that RAND study, but something like a small number, like 14 or 9 or something, somewhere in that range of traffic stops involve suspicion of criminal activity, and so most are just routine kind of the sort of things that were described to us in our training. But this one I feel like was a real powder keg. There's no doubt in my mind that this person, for whatever reasons, may not be that they're a criminal, but they were ready to defend themselves against the police officer who had stopped them with their revolver. I think that is why it was cocked. That is why the hammer was back. Bernadette, you seem confused, but it seems to me like this person. I don't know why you would have a cocked revolver in the well of your driver's side door when you're being stopped by a cop, unless it's because you are expecting to defend yourself against the cop. So this is I think that this is where this person's head was. I don't know why they stabbed themselves with a knife, but there's a lot of professionals that seem pretty convinced in the file that this wound was self-inflicted, including the medical personnel. And so I think that the de-escalation was beautiful. I think it did not go south because this officer de-escalated beautifully, as people have said. The second half of the stop, once the gun has been cited and they're trying to get the driver out of the car, this I think is where the judgment kicks in. And Carolyn, thank you for bringing us back to the captain's memo, because they spell it out very, very clearly, right? So where is it? Once you saw the knife, even prior to the observing the knife, right, you should request cover. Once you saw the knife and heard the questionable explanation for it being in the person's thigh, you didn't expedite cover or request additional units. One might argue that it is a judgment call on an officer's part whether to expedite or request additional cover, but I believe a reasonable response would be to have done so, especially after you learned there was an unsecured firearm in the vehicle. You were the ranking officer, and thereby making this your scene to control. Once Eugene Springfield Fire Department and your cover arrived, there was opportunity to brief both your cover officer and fire personnel as the best way to proceed. I think had this occurred, it would have alleviated much of ESFD's concerns related to the incident. Unfortunately, this did not occur. Right, and so one consideration I have is your decision to remove the person from the car by yourself. I understand your desire to have your cover officer remain on the passenger side of the vehicle for an unobstructed view, but your decision to be the sole person responsible for controlling them is questionable at best. Of greater concern was your decision to keep hold of the driver's left hand with your left hand once you unexpectedly discovered the firearm and retrieving the firearm with your right hand. This decision, apparently made in an instant, allowed the confluence of events to occur, which ultimately caused the unintentional discharge of the firearm, right? Which didn't hurt anyone, but easily could have. right? I mean, easily that could have hurt the officer, could have hurt the fire department personnel, could have hurt the driver. And so when I looked into the description of the policy and for judgment, good judgment is defined for this policy as those decisions and actions that a reasonable employee, like the captain, in similar circumstances would use or take, given the information they knew or should have known at this time. So I feel like this is one of those situations where the policy calls for us to understand what a reasonable employee would do. We're hearing from an EPD captain that they don't think that they would have used different judgment. I think that I don't see a reason why the auditor's office or I should disagree with that in this case. That seems pretty well laid out in that memo.
Okay, so I have a couple questions. One, I think for Leah, and then one probably for Jason. So about you not writing an adjudication, I have just a follow-up on that. There was an email that you sent to, can I say the name of the woman to who you sent?
I sent it to IA.
You sent it to IA that
Mhm.
said that you had a lot on your plate, which is true, and that you agree with the captain. So I think that that is sufficient, especially considering when we get chain of command letters, we often, it's just the chain of command, like the chief agreeing with the captain. So I guess my question is, how often does that happen? Like, not for you necessarily specifically, but for like the whole thing, because like we have so many cases where we get the auditor, the chain of command, and the chief writing an adjudication, and then we get some where it's just two. So what are like the policies on when you have to and when you don't have to? Is it just kind of if you would disagree?
I have discretion. I get to make recommendations to the chief, and there's actually nothing that says that they need to be in writing. I can make those recommendations sort of however I choose. I will say that historically, I like to express myself in writing. I think I do better that way. So historically, it would be rare for me to not write one. Mark would sometimes choose to not write one, especially if it was an employee, like a non-sworn employee, so it wouldn't be reviewed by you fine people like this one is. So he wouldn't get called out like I am. Just kidding. But no, I would say generally before this year, it was extremely rare for me to decline to write something, and I would only do it in a case where I agree with the recommendation of chain of command. This year, it has happened a few times. This year is phenomenally different. And hopefully that will change soon, but I hope that answers your question.
It did, and I think it's important to understand that you have the discretion to do that.
Yeah, and I should say I'm taking this purely as flattery that you all like my writing, so just continue, it's fine.
That's cute. Okay, so then Jason, so in terms of policy and practices, the choice to both not arrest or cite this person for the traffic stop, that's one thing. But then also the felony, having a gun when they weren't supposed to, because did I get that right? That it should have been a felony offense to have a gun when they are a felon. Is that correct?
Yes, typically speaking. This has been a minute since I've done this investigation, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to review it before the meeting since I'm not in IA anymore. I don't have access to all those files readily. I don't know for certain if the guy was a felon. I understand the concern that since he's been shot by the police before, you'd assume so, but I don't know what the end result was to that court. And I don't think the involved employee had that information at the time. But typically speaking, yes, if you've been convicted of a felony, it does make it a crime for you to own a firearm. And I don't remember, I don't know if that was in play or not. I don't think that guy was charged with that, but that would be a discretionary thing.
Okay. And then the policy and the practice of so my assumption is that since they didn't cite this person and they didn't arrest this person, they were basically free to go. And that's why they put them in the ambulance without an EPD like escort.
Yes.
Okay. And then, but the fire department people felt like that wasn't appropriate and that they put them in an unsafe situation. Would they have been within their rights to have a discussion about that on the site before they were released and before they took like custody of this person, so to speak?
Yeah, we do work closely with the fire department, so they could have, if they were feeling uneasy, they could have requested that, and I'm sure we would have made efforts to have an officer ride with them. The firefighter, as I recall, when I talked to them, he was under the impression, sorry, they were under the impression that this person was in custody. And it wasn't until I explained to them that this was a crime victim at the time. So that kind of changes things. So I think when they were really upset about it, which I understood at the time, they were under some false assumptions that we were taking this person into custody, and that wasn't the case based on the fact set that we had. So typically speaking, if you're a victim of something, police don't ride in the ambulance with you to go to the hospital. If you got stabbed, you wouldn't expect to see a police officer riding with you. So they would have had to make that special request, and I don't believe that they did that.
Okay, that makes sense. So it seems like there was a lack of communication
Yes, I'd say that's probably true.
at the scene, probably from both sides or all three sides. But okay, I think that's all. Thank you. Bill.
Carolyn, thanks for asking that question about if he was a felon or not, because I think we've all assumed a lot of things that were inside that captains from the fire department was true. And as Bernadette pointed out early on, he wrote it at 3 o'clock in the morning because he was mad about something. And so half of that could not be true. But I'll leave it there. So on policies, I do think our judgment policy is probably needs to be reviewed and looked at, that maybe it's because the reasonable man test is not because you're a captain, it's reasonable. A reasonable man's test that anybody here or any other police officer in the department would say, I would do the same thing, or at least a majority of them would do the same thing. So it's not that we get to pick who gets to be that reasonable person. It's more of that. So I agree. I probably need to have that policy looked at a little bit better and a little bit clearer on what judgment is, because these officers have to make lots of judgments every time they step into that patrol car or sit in that patrol car. I guess you don't step into it, but and so if they, if they're being, have this policy that says, well, every time I do something, I could get called in for this. So, practices, and I do, Bernadette, I love your opening with, this is a great training video, and I agree that I would probably have other officers look at how this was handled, because it all ended well. And I want to point that out. Nobody got hurt. Nobody, the person that didn't get, he wasn't pulled out of the car, wasn't physically assaulted or hands-on to do that. But I think that there was a lot of calmness that makes these situations end up without anybody getting hurt. I know a firearm was discharged, but that was more of an accidental piece than it was. So I'll end there.
So I do need to go back when we were talking about the monitoring of the case. I failed to mention that I think once it was clear with the chain of command as to what the particular items of judgment concern were, I think the involved officer should have been given an opportunity to address those concerns one by one. And I think we might be in a better position about some of these things. Given how well the de-escalation was going, I think this officer probably also had in the back of their mind that to call in a bunch of officers at this point, lights and siren, could jump this case all the way to all of the de-escalation that had been going on and could have escalated it to a point where it was really concerning. I think there's an assumption being made that this gun was cocked, and I don't think that it necessarily was. Anybody that's ever shot a revolver knows that the hammer can, I mean, some of them, it's like you just hit the hammer and it shoots it. So I think making the assumption that this revolver was by the driver's side, cocked and ready to be used, I think that's a poor assumption to make, just like it's a poor assumption to make that this person put the knife in themselves, that was a felon and should be arrested, that cues were missed. I think the officer saw all of these cues, took all of those things into consideration. And I think based on their 20 plus years of experience in dealing with people, it showed in the situation that they recognized each of these things. They took it into consideration. They recognized that when they saw the gun as the door was being opened, that this changed the situation. But at that point, you're into it and you don't have a lot of options. And so I'm not sure what policy or training could be changed that would change the outcome of this situation, in that the officer took all of these things into consideration, recognized the hold that they had on this person's arm controlled them quite well, and had cover on the other side also watching. So I think the training, and I don't think there was any training or policies that could, any training that could happen that would change this situation. I think one thing that I always try to remember, that is, just because everything ends right doesn't mean everybody did everything right. And just because something ends wrong doesn't mean everybody did something wrong. Nobody on this board, and I can't remember if Leah was here when the tasing of the Chinese student happened. That was a situation where it was a question about whether they should have waited for cover. And that happened so much more quickly and without any information to the level that this officer had when this encounter happened, as it progressed. And so maybe it's, this reasonable person, myself, is different than you reasonable people because of the number of cases I've seen on the CRB. And so I'm looking at it differently because I've seen so many cases of judgment, that they were lucky that it went right. I don't think this is a case where this officer was lucky it went right. I think this officer knew what the officer was doing. And I think it went right because they had complete control of the situation. That's all.
All right, that was everybody with this one. So next is Clay starting, and I apologize because you've never done this before. Adjudication recommendations. This is basically where we just go around and we say whether or not we agreed or who we agreed with, depending on if there's disagreement in the adjudications. So Clay, do you feel comfortable starting, even though you've never done it?
Could we rotate so that I go last?
Sure, yeah.
So I can get a sense of how people talk about that
Yeah,
specifically.
that's fine.
I have an opinion, but
Cool.
Yeah.
So Michael, can you go ahead and start us on this, and then it'll work its way around to Clay?
Yeah, so I agree with the adjudication. I think that the officer may have thought that they had control of the situation, but they didn't have control of the flashlight. They didn't have control of the gun. They didn't have control of the situation. And I think that it would, I don't see why it would have been a leap for them to have asked the cover officer to come over and handle the gun. That is, yeah, I'm not sure why. And as far as the hammer being back, that was not my assumption. That was what the officer who was found to have poor judgment had said when it went off. They said the hammer was back. Those words came out of the officer's mouth. So I'm just not sure why there's so much resistance on the board to the adjudication. But I agree with it.
I also agree with the adjudication. I think watching the video, I had the same kind of initial reaction as I think Bernadette stated, seeing that it looked like a really well done stop, but then reading the captain's letter, that really helped kind of solidify that it was poor judgment on the officer's part. And I appreciate that sometimes it takes the discussion between Leah's office and IA and all of those people to come to these conclusions. And I appreciate that that's part of the process, because if I, putting myself in the auditor's shoes with this one, I probably would have, I would have been influenced by the captain's letter. And I think that helped lead it to the right end of sustaining the allegation.
So as you guys have heard me on this, I usually I'm tougher on supervisors than on the patrol officers. But in this case, I disagree with the adjudication. I do think that, you know, we're making a lot of armchair quarterback pieces here that, you know, I think what I saw on there is what we've been working as policies for the department for the 10 years that I sat on the commission, the police commission, doing policies, was to have people act like this and not lose their cool and not take things up to a different level and end up with the right outcome of that. And so I think it was, so I'm against it. I will add one thing, Leah, just because everybody else picked on you about your memo, but I only say that, and I understand your workload, and I know you're doing your best, but I think there is an importance to hear your thoughts, because you're a little closer in this than we are, because you get access to having all these things. So I think I just want to iterate that your opinion is very important to us, and it's nice to see it.
Thank you.
Sorry. So I disagree with the adjudication. That would be my short answer. I know that in cases where people make complaints against officers, and there's a video, the video is often shown to the complainant for them to look at and say, oh, yeah, okay, I see it. I'm just kind of curious as why this wasn't an option in this case.
I think it was. I think, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you show it, or did you just explain it all to the fire person when you spoke with?
It wasn't shown until after the classification and the investigation was being done. During the
Oh,
course.
that's typical.
So, okay, the other ones I had seen were that it was shown before before the classification was made. But okay.
Yeah, I don't think I make that a practice.
Okay. I think the reason I can't remember if you used the word hostile, Michael, or reluctant to choose to sustain this, is because, again, I've seen other cases, and I think given those other cases, I just don't see this as rushing anything. I mean, the officer that was backup came over and took possession of the firearm at that point. I think to say that he didn't have that there wasn't control of the situation because a flashlight rolled off of the hood of the car, I can't say that that's poor judgment by putting a flashlight on top of the car as a reason to sustain a judgment call. And I just think the other things, I just disagree. That I think the officer used the appropriate judgment every step of the way and explained it during the course of the investigation. I think that there's a frustration here. It was that the officer was not given enough opportunity to understand what each of the particulars of the judgment, alleged misjudgment was. That's all.
Well, for me, I'm a proponent of de-escalation. I am certainly a proponent of officer safety. This case is awkward in that you find one finds oneself in the position of saying what Bill says would be the escalation. I don't know that that means that it's guns drawn and escalates to the level of a felony stop, but it certainly escalate. It's a head scratcher for me to be saying, gee, that supervisor didn't do enough to protect himself or the people, the fire people that generated the complaint. And so, I think it's unusual. It's like a reverse, it is a bit of a reverse. Of course I want them to de-escalate, and I don't want them. I'm glad for the outcome, but I do believe that the captain's memo kind of states the reason why it was a valid complaint. Thank you.
I apologize. I have a couple of questions. One is my understanding, and I'm going to say my understanding, and then hopefully someone can correct me if I'm wrong. One of my understandings is that the involved officer knew about the gun, and there was a time gap between hearing from the person in the vehicle about the gun and informing fire. Is that correct?
That's a very good question, and I don't remember. So
Yeah, that's an assumption that I'm going off of, is that there was a lack of communication about the circumstances that led to me thinking this could have been a dangerous situation. One of the reasons why I agree with the adjudication is that there was a certain lack of communication of the potential severity of what could be going on. Another question is an assumption that I just want to verify. The knife was still in the person's leg in the vehicle while the officer was trying to get the person out of the vehicle. And in the interview with the officer, didn't the officer state that you want to be close when someone has the gun and far away when someone has a knife? And so to me, there's a judgment there where the officer is putting themselves in a situation where they are close, very close. The right hand of the person in the vehicle is free. The left hand is not free. There's a gun also. There's just a lot of things that I think it's a very hard situation to be in. And I'm not a police officer. I don't have the kind of training, but police officers do have a lot of training, and we need to be able to have a conversation about judgment in those situations to hopefully keep them safe. And so that's why I agree with this adjudication. I don't think the supervisor really, I don't think they deserve to be chastised in a hard way. You know what I mean? Like it's not that they did everything wrong, but I think the safety of themselves and also their colleagues is super important. And there were some judgment calls that I think that were made, as the captain explained in the memo, that could have put them at risk. So that's why I agree with the adjudication.
thank you. Caroline, can I have a second just to talk about adjudication, since I didn't write a memo?
Absolutely. Thank you. I think we'd all love to hear from you, Leah.
Apparently. Remember, I'm better in writing. No, I just want to say I really appreciate this discussion around this. This was something, when I say we talked a lot about this, we talked a lot about this. I think the employee did a lot of things right. And then to us, we talked so much about the perspective of sort of when things started to turn a little bit, how this could have been handled differently, this employee's particular experience and training and what that would have led them to do. And I guess two things. One is it seems, I will say the deputy chief is the one who really convinced me. She had very strong feelings about this one, and the expectations that they have for employees in their department, and the risks that they will take and the risks that they shouldn't take. And so that helped me a lot, because after I spoke with the employee, I was like, well, you seem very calm all the time. I don't know. But no, sorry, that was me being a little bit flip. But it was one of those where I kind of flipped back and forth over the course of the investigation. So I appreciate hearing everyone's perspective. Like I say, I try not to bring you easy ones. I like it when you guys disagree. So I hope you appreciate that too. I will say, generally a sustained judgment allegation is not going to be I guess harsh corrective action, but not that we talk about that here or that I have any input into it, but just sort of in general. And I can't comment on to the discipline here, but if you look at the annual report and the trends in discipline, that's what that will show you. And I think those are the main points. Just again, I appreciate this group. I appreciate your disagreement. I appreciate hearing all the things that I thought in my head come out of everybody's mouths. It's very helpful. So.
Thanks, Leah. We are about 20 minutes behind schedule at this point. Are we okay skipping the break and just moving into the next case so we can hopefully end on time? I see a lot of thumbs up. So.
Yes.
Thank you, Leah. Go ahead.
All right. I'm going to share my screen again, guys. Seamless, like I said. All right, so case 2 is an incident review. A while back, you guys requested to look at one incident review and one case per meeting. So we're trying that tonight because I forgot last month. So this was reporting party contacted our office with a third-party complaint. A student of theirs had reported they'd been stopped by an officer for pedestrian violation. Student felt the stop had been motivated by bias and that the folks involved were treated differently because of their race. We reviewed the body worn video and classified it as an incident review for internal affairs to go over. And the video illustrated the student had committed the violation. It appeared from the video the officer had attempted repeatedly to communicate that before the violation happened. Internal affairs reached out to the reporting party to discuss the investigation, offered to show them the video. Reporting party is satisfied with the details provided, but also sort of discussed the sort of inherent problems in issuing citations to folks who can't pay them and how that has repercussions later on. So I did the tabs with the sort of typical things that you guys talk about: intake, classification, investigation, monitoring, policies, practices, training. There is no adjudication here, so I didn't include that, nor did I write a memo. Sorry, that was stop. But I think this case to me brought out more restorative justice issues. It's something I'm trying to start to get some traction on. And then also the issue of LECC reporting, which is when we report complaints of bias to a state body. So I'm going to stop. Wait, and here are the materials that you all received. Now I will stop sharing my screen and let you folks talk.
All right. I think we could all appreciate if we could be a little succinct with this discussion. Do you want to go over those 4 things that you listed, or do you want to just have like a more kind of each person have a talk?
I think, no, it was more that those are the things that pop into my head that I thought you guys might want to talk about, but you talk about whatever you want to talk about. Yeah.
Okay. Michael.
This might just be me, but given our more limited time, and I would love to hear Leah talk about the LECC reporting and just like say more about that, but I don't know when. I'm just putting that out there.
Leah, maybe briefly before we talk, so we kind of know what we're talking about.
Sure. Okay. LECC reporting, actually Clay may know a lot about this, but the state passed a law a few years ago that every agency in the state would report complaints of bias to a state body, the Law Enforcement Contacts Commission. I cannot remember what it stands for, but it's LECC, and recently went under the umbrella of, I think before it was under PSU, but now it's at DOJ. Anyway, it's a state reporting system. And so anytime we get a complaint from someone that says the police were biased, we have to send the complaint, how it was resolved. And Cindy, you definitely know more than me, so if you want to jump in, if I'm missing anything, that would be great. But if I've got it, then good.
Yeah, so far so good. So yes, any complaint of bias-based policing that our department receives, we try to flag it at intake. And if not at intake, as we go through an investigation, we'll flag it. And then I do send those reports to LECC. Law Enforcement Contacts Committee, I think is what it's called. Any other questions about that?
Thank you, Cindy.
Okay, this being our first discussion of this kind, do you just want to go around and have kind of your first round of thoughts? And then if there's any follow-up that people want to add, we can add to the end. Are people good with that as our kind of model? Okay, I see one person nodding. So 2 people, 3 people. Okay. Clay, do you want to start us with this? Or do you want me to?
You should.
Okay.
New member handicap.
No, that's fine. I remember my first meeting. It was terrifying. Not saying you're terrified. I was. I think it was handled well. I think that the intake was good. I don't think that it needed to be moved beyond an incident review. I think that there was good follow-up with the whole process and talking to the reporting party and offering to let them see everything they wanted to see or everything they could have seen. That was good. My first thought was that I agree that it seemed like a bias stop, because I don't know that, or at least the ticket was based on bias. I don't know how often people actually get ticketed for crossing at a red light. I think I'd be interested to hear that, because I feel like I'm pretty cavalier about it when I'm crossing the street. If I look and there are no cars, I'll go through. And Michael, yeah, you too. So I am curious to see if that's often ticketed. So is this a Ryan case? Is that why Ryan's here? Or is Ryan here just because he's like our guy now?
No, this is a Ryan case.
It's mine. I can speak to that a little bit for you. And I don't know. I'll apologize because I don't know what material you guys received. I don't know if you got my closing memo or not, but
Yes,
okay.
they did.
Perfect. Great. So kind of like Sergeant Marsh spoke about earlier, the traffic enforcement unit or traffic safety unit they're called now, that's their primary goal is to get compliance. Whether that's done through warnings or done through citations, he's already explained all that, so I'm not going to dive into it for you. But I will say that if a traffic safety officer is working a particular place, in this situation, that officer was working that intersection, watching for traffic violations, then any violation that takes place in that area is a stop. And like Sergeant Marsh had spoken to you guys earlier about, is that they are more likely to write citations than patrol officers are. So my experience in almost 20 years is that I kind of, well, to be fair, I kind of joke with people. They go, well, I got a ticket, people that I know, they'll say, I got a ticket. And I was like, well, who stopped you? It was a motor officer. I'm like, yeah, of course you got a ticket. Like, you always get a ticket for motor officers. So if a violation takes place in their presence, they typically write that citation. To me, it didn't jump out as anything unusual at all in my 20 years of experience, but I can appreciate where you come from on that. But if they're focused on an intersection for violations on that intersection, in this case, that officer was sitting next to the building watching that particular intersection for violations, the result, my experience is, they would typically give a citation.
Okay, that's interesting. I guess a follow-up question would be, I totally understood with Sergeant Marsh saying that it's better to, what did he say? The enforcement approach has more success than warning. And that makes sense when it's like something that is impacting the community safety. So somebody speeding down a highway or running a red light at this intersection. I would hope that a red light running at this intersection would get a ticket, because that's a very interesting intersection. But a pedestrian, that doesn't seem like the same level to me of, you know, they were endangering themselves. They were kind of taking their own lives into their hands, I suppose. But so I guess my next question, or just the thought that I want to put out there, is when it's a pedestrian violation, I feel like a warning could be better since it isn't actually endangering other people. And I don't think that, Ryan, you have to speak to that necessarily. So even though I did form it as a question. So I'm going to let it move on to Bill.
Thank you, Carolyn. Brian, I have one question for you on, oh gosh, now I lost my train of thought when I was listening to Carolyn. Anyway, I'll come back to that. So I guess my initial thoughts on this is that, you know, these are the slippery slope ones that if the people put up a lot of, you know, they don't want to listen to the officer, they don't want to do that. You know, these are the ones that can ultimately end up in, you know, an escalated use of force that I need, you know, want to make sure the officers are, you know, always wary of that. This is a pretty minor infraction that if that couple decided to continue to walk or continue to do and ignore, I think, you know, you have to weigh the bigger picture of, is it worth getting into a fight or going hands-on with them? And so I think that's where some of these come into that, to do that. Oh, and I didn't remember my question, Ryan. So did you reach out to try to talk to the two individuals that were I guess the scope of the complaint? Because the complaint didn't come from them, it came from a third party.
Right. So let me add something first, if I could, to what Carolyn said earlier. And honestly, it kind of falls into your statement too, Bill. The one thing that Sergeant Marsh said was that, you know, we're trying to gain compliance, and that is what the ultimate goal of that team is. And honestly, all of law enforcement is like get people to do the things they need to do, and, you know, so that we can all live our lives. But in that case in particular, I know that the first 30 seconds of that body worn video, you don't have audio captured on that. But in speaking with Sergeant Marsh, and you could kind of see I'm sorry, I almost said his name. You could kind of see the officer like making a gesture towards the two people getting ready to cross, and it appeared as though he was saying something to them. And the information I had received was that he was telling them, hey, don't cross. Like, he's trying to get compliance by saying don't cross the intersection. Now, whether or not they heard him or not, because you heard the other conversation once he stopped them, that I thought you were just saying hi, that kind of thing. I don't know for sure, but I think in that case, the officer was actually trying to get that compliance ahead of time, and then they continued to walk across, and then that citation was given at the end. I lost my train of thought, Bill. Can you repeat your actual question there?
So did you reach out to talk to the two individuals?
So I offered when I spoke with the complainant, if they wanted to talk to me, if there's anything they wanted to discuss, that I would be willing to do that. And I never received a call back from that. And the complainant himself was satisfied with that conversation. And again, I offered to meet with him and show him the video himself if he wanted to see it, and he didn't want to see that. So.
No, I appreciate that. It was just interesting that they didn't want to at least meet. And I think somehow we got to make that people understand it's important to have what they think happened, or what they what they have told people happened, that they get to tell us too, that so that we can actually understand.
Yeah, I agree. Those conversations are important if we can have them. So.
So I'll just leave it. I think, what I saw, I think that, they did, just tried to get them to comply and didn't, to escalate. I think some of the motor cops probably should have left after they realized that it was, this two young people there that really probably weren't going to do anything other than just not want to be super cooperative. But, that's another piece. But that's it for me.
So first I need to say that I had videos I didn't have any paperwork. So Ryan, I didn't get to read your fabulous closing memo. I looked on everything, Leah. I don't know why I didn't have it. Second, this motor officer is the one that responded to my accident and the hospital when I was there. So I have a relation, well, and I'll back up further. When I was a volunteer crossing guard at Roosevelt Middle School many, many years ago, motorcycle officers would come by and assist from time to time because 24th Street was a dangerous place and it was a T intersection. And so the officer that is at the focus of this is someone that I have known for many years. And I don't have a social relationship with them or anything, but I certainly know this officer probably more than maybe a couple of the other motor officers, because I don't know who the other motor officers are right now. I would also note that, again, probably not, Bill, I don't remember if you were on the board, but this is the third pedestrian complaint that we've seen on my time on the board before, during, or after my tenures. The first one was also a student stopped on Coburg Road because the officer, again, tried to tell them not to cross against the light, crossed against the light right in front of the officer's car. As the light turned green for the officer went around into the parking lot and said, "Hey, you're not supposed to cross against the light." And they immediately said, "You're just stopping me because of my race." And so the discussion we had then, as we, are going to probably have a little bit tonight, it's like, what does an officer do when that's the first thing that is stated? Because the officer, as I recall, didn't recognize this person even after getting ID and information that they were anything other than white. It wasn't apparent to the officer, and the officers wasn't until the complaint was filed that that issue came up, as being an issue. And then another time was a car nearly hit a pedestrian crossing Chambers to go to the Albertsons, and the officer stopped the car and said, "Hey, the pedestrian had the right of way there," and it just escalated. And the person just, basically said, you're just citing me because of my race. And the officer's like, "Well, no, I want you to comply and not do that and recognize that, the pedestrian had the right of way." So I kind of am remembering those cases. And so in this situation, it's like, I think we can see from the video that something was said to the people before they crossed, and it had the people's attention, because even though we can't hear it, they looked back. And then when first then contacted, one of the first comments was, that it was profiling. And I'm always question, what does an officer do when that is one of the first things said? How do we as a community want our officers to respond? Because at that point, that allegation is made, rightly or wrongly. It's like, how do you move beyond it? And so I think, given what we heard, that, when they're motor officers and they're there for traffic safety, they're there to enforce, because they recognize that, you can't tell them to take the cookie out of the jar so many times. So I don't know what the answer is. I think it's somewhat problematic that, we aren't able to tell our officers what to do when confronted with a situation like this, that's the first thing that a member of the community says to them when they have contact with them. So I wish there was a discussion that could be had that could help the officers in that situation and help the community in that situation, but I'm not sure that we can figure that out here in this group. That's all.
Well, I would say the motors are unique. It's definitely a different job. They're out there and they're doing one thing. And in this case, a violation happens right in front of the officer. The officer really readily, apparently, tries to prevent it. It's a loud intersection. There's a lot of noise. There's no way to know whether they heard him or they heard the officer or not. what I have a few observations about this stop. The biggest ones are the amount of time, the enlargement of the time to complete the stop and issue citations. The laws that you're supposed to, on a violation like that, do it pretty quickly. And we saw a demonstration of the computer to the sergeant. We saw, some discussion. And the second complaint is that there were just too many officers. Like that, it's at one point there was a car across the street. There were the sergeant, 2 motors, so at least 3 motorcycles, at least 1 police car, possibly more at one time, calling a lot of attention to it. And what I want, in kind of response to what Bernadette said, I want that officer who people right in front of you that happens, to not do anything is kind of like, that's their job. And motors take a lot of pride in their enforcement. And it's thumbing your nose to be told, please don't cross the street, and cross the street in front of the officer. And so there's this contact made, but I want the officer to know that at that point, the officer could have just said, I'm going to cut you loose, and not fear that a bias complaint or something was the fact that they didn't write the ticket. There's this reverse trap of like, I better write the citation now, because if I don't, it's going to be like I just stopped them for not the legitimate reasons. So it kind of, there's this negative feedback reinforcement to write a ticket in that circumstance. I want the officers just to, I hope they feel that, whoa, like it might have just been easier to let those people walk away. The one of them particularly seemed particularly agitated, and it could have really escalated. And so even despite the presence of all those officers, it didn't, and that was a good thing. And the stop, it was a stop and a cite. I think it resolved itself all correctly. I just wish it had taken less time and with fewer officers. Thank you.
I don't want to disrupt the order, but I do want to just clarify one thing, and Ryan, please correct me if I'm wrong, but because the statement was made, you did this because of your profiling. That's a citizen complaint, right? So a supervisor is there. I believe the policy is a supervisor has to come to the scene, should notify us of the citizen complaint. There's a bunch of things that need to happen, but Ryan knows that better than I do. But I agree with you. I think having more officers didn't help, but I think there is sort of a pattern in place for when a complaint like this is made during a stop. So I'll stop talking now.
Yeah, I'll just add to that really quick. Sorry, I'll make it brief. Yes, the officer is required to have a supervisor come on the scene whenever that is mentioned, that there could be a bias reason for the stop. So that is supposed to happen. He also initially asked for a cover unit. So there were obviously other motor officers in the area. I don't disagree with you, Alan, that maybe some of those folks could have left sooner. I don't disagree with that statement whatsoever. The one piece too that I just want to explain from a procedural perspective is our motor officers actually, because of the amount of radio traffic that we receive, they actually have been asked to run their own stops on their computers. So that does take longer, and that is a longer process for them to have to pull it out of their little side bags and run their folks by themselves rather than run it through dispatch. So I mean, that's something that to consider if that's a concern, but that is something that they've been required to do.
Yeah, I was just going to say it was like 17 minutes, 16 or 17 minutes before the one of the 2 people was handed their citation. And pedestrian stop, there isn't insurance, there's a lot of things less a wants check and a ticket, and so it seems like it just took a little too long, and in that particular situation created additional kind of agitation. Thank you.
Sure. And if I remember correctly, and it's been a while since I've watched the video, but like one person had ID and one person didn't. So he had to run one person through dispatch because he wasn't sure because he needed descriptors, and that's harder to do on a computer. And then the other one he had to run through his computer. So those things definitely took more time. I agree.
All right. Yeah, I don't have many problems with this with the particulars of this instance. I think there was some warning of. I won't reiterate what's been said about that. It's one of why I asked earlier about outcomes and data tracking for outcomes of traffic stops is because I think that's actually a better thing to sort of analyze. You know, there's this one stop and it went pretty well, but there's also trends in the police department that we could be looking at too, or that other groups might be looking at. And so I think it would be helpful for us to at some point review traffic stops and also what data is taken on those traffic stops. You know, I think Sergeant Marsh said earlier, you know, gender and race identifiers and some other categories of information that are taken. It'd just be it would be good to know what those things are, just to understand what kind of data we're able to gather from those stops, and then also outcomes from those stops, because I do think, you know, it's challenging. You know, for there's a lot of conversations in our community and across the US right now about race relations, about the, you know, lots of problems in our history for how people have been treated. And that's going to continue to arise, whether there are lived experiences that people have had who are coming into contact with the police, or whether there's just a narrative from other data from other cities, or from media that they've been reading, or from, you know, other people's lived experiences. And so it is something that the police will need to deal with. And so, like you were saying, Bernadette, I think it's an important part of training, and I would like to know how that how those conversations are playing out within the police bureau for stops that could lead to uncomfortable conversations about, you know, a white officer stopping a person of color, and what that dynamic can lead to, because I think that'll only happen more and more. And we need to be able to have productive conversations and safe conversations between those two parties. So I don't really have an outcome, a hopeful outcome from that, but I think it would be interesting to learn more about how that conversation is playing out in the police bureau, as we probably will see more throughout, you know, our time on this board, more cases related to that. I think that's it.
So this is a hard one. Partly because, you know, as I watched the video, you know, my first thought is, well, I have crossed into that situation like more often than not. The situation just being of the kind of intersection, right, where traffic is zooming along one direction, the other street is a fairly minor street, it appears. You look, there's no cars coming, you cross. But I've never done that right after having been told not to by a police officer. And so, I mean, that obviously, or even actually even while there's an officer there, whether they tell me not to or not, I haven't done that. And so, so it you know, it seemed to me likely that at least one of the pedestrians did hear what was saying, since only one of the pedestrians continued out into the intersection, the other one stayed behind, and then there seemed to be a little bit of a debate between the two of them about whether or not this was a good idea. And then the second one follows, and they do indeed cross. And at that point, the officer pulls out. At that point, you know, it doesn't seem surprising to me that they get the citation because of everything I just said. To answer the question of like, how would we want, or how would I want police officers to respond when this kind of allegation is made about bias? You know, I don't think that they're going to be less likely to think that this was a result of bias, given how it fell out. I think that you know, once you're a young person from a protected class, on the side of the road at a busy street, surrounded by cops, whatever negative impression there was about law enforcement and race is now permanent, probably. And I've come back to like a case that we heard my first meeting for this board. It was a much more serious case where a young person from the same protected class was treated very, very I think we found unfairly by law enforcement, and again, and in that situation too, I just remember thinking, whatever this young person thought about law enforcement beforehand, they do not have a positive impression now. And I just think that, I did not think that the officer in the previous case did everything wrong. I think I was tried to be very clear that they did the de-escalation beautifully. And I think that what I would like to see in an officer's response is patience, is that level of patience. I think that, the accusations made, there's a moment of disbelief or annoyance or like something. There's some kind of emotional response initially that I think I saw on the part of the officer, and then you move past that right into patience. And I'm not saying that the officer wasn't patient here, but I think that that's what needs to happen. And understanding, like, if there would have been some way to have I don't know, but I think that's just to answer the question, that's what I think people would like to see when they make that kind of accusation. I mean, I think that in the other case, there was a similar implication, right? When the driver said, you guys shot me in the past, right? The implication being, I don't trust you. And what we saw was a masterclass in de-escalation, right? An extremely patient response to that. That's what needs to happen, and that's what we have to expect from our people in blue.
All right, that was everybody, correct? Is there any follow-up that people want to add, or should we move on to the next thing? Move on. Okay, the next thing on the agenda is election of chair and vice chair. Leah, could you guide us through this process? How are we going to do it?
I would accept a motion from anyone about who to, or you could have a motion on who you want to be. So there's lots of ways to do it. One, simplest would be a motion. Bill, thank you.
Do you want me to do the motion? I got a motion.
Do your motion and then I'll talk if I have to, and hopefully I won't have to.
So I move that we re-elect Carolyn as our chairperson for the next year or so.
If you wanted, you could do a combination one just to make it real fast. A slate of officers.
I'm getting a look from one of the Zoom members that I'm not sure I should do that, but I would like to add Bernadette as the vice chairperson for the next year, but I may be afraid.
So there's a motion on the table. If anyone would like to second, they may second, and then we will have discussion. You guys, okay.
I'll second it to get a discussion going. Sure.
Okay, and now we can go to discussion, and I will say there's several different ways to do it. If anyone is interested, they may put themselves out there. I would say I haven't heard from anyone that there is interest. So
that's what I was going to say. I think we should give an opportunity for others that may have an interest in it to step forward, or at least recognize that, And for Carolyn to say, I don't want to do it anymore, for me to say, I don't want to do it anymore, or Bill to say, gosh, I'd really love to do this, but I didn't want to nominate myself. So,
This is the opportunity. This is the discussion.
correct.
Yeah, so I will say, like, my context would typically to be more like that, given that with 10 minutes till 8 and I haven't heard from anybody, I kind of went with Bill, like pushing Bill, as you saw, I prodded him. So anyone, if you have
I
interest.
call the question, let's vote.
Thank you, Michael. God, you guys really
Can
need to.
you just do this as a poll?
No. Sorry. I can do it as a poll. Hold on.
No, they don't like vote the wrong ways again.
Thank
See, that's what I was hoping for, Michael. I was
Michael-
really hoping you'd go the wrong way again.
Okay. Michael called the question. All in favor have to say aye with jazz hands.
And Bernadette, if you're not willing to do it, you can say that. And
No, she can't. It's done. It's passed.
I can always resign halfway through the year. So.
She can resign whenever she wants. She's
Or you could resign next month, Bernadette. Hopefully
Right,
you
I'll
won't.
give Alan and Clay a chance to understand what they stepped into on this board and then step aside in January if need be.
right. Thank you, everybody. I apologize for sort of rushing that through, but again, in the interest of time, thank you, everyone. Yes, everyone is serving at will and may choose to abandon post whenever they so choose. Just please give warning because
Jose is also not here tonight, so we could see if
Yes.
he's interested and feels really sad that he doesn't get to do this.
Yeah, we
I
could,
will. Go ahead, Michael.
if we want to do it, we could vote Jose in his absence.
No, we can, no. I'm not gonna let that happen.
We will let him know that you saved him, Bernadette.
Yeah. Tell us, hey, Michael threw him under the bus too.
I will just say informally, if anyone has interest in a leadership position, please feel free to contact me, contact Carolyn, contact Bernadette. This is obviously not a group full of egos. We want this experience to be shared by everyone. So yes, let us know if you're interested. I'll stop talking now. Carolyn, your meeting.
No, it's your turn. It's the auditor report.
Yes.
Just keep going.
Sweet. All right. Well, I had actually some things written since you all like my writing so much. But again, in the interest of time, I will try to go very, very quickly. I will just say, number one, Vicky is amazing and wonderful, and I am lucky always for Vicky. She is holding me together at the seams, pretty much. No, so she's handling, we have a lot of complaints coming in. It's been busy, and I appreciate Vicky very, very much. Beatrice will be back soon. She also has her hands full, but she's doing great. I'm excited for her to come back. We have 2 employees still in. Michael is throwing wrenches in the chat. I'll get to that. We will have 2 employees. We have 2 employees still in background checks. Those take some time because they are very, very thorough. I am really hoping that at least one of them will be at the meeting next month. That would be great. Let's see. I was going to start a philosophical discussion. I'm not going to do that now. Working with the ERC on crafting a job description for the diversity, equity, and inclusion officer position that I've spoken with you about. I think it was a little while ago. New members may want a refresher on that, but basically looking at a lot of the stuff that came out of the ad hoc report and just in my own thinking and learning over the last year, I'm hoping to add a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer who would be housed in our office, funded by our office, reporting to me, but with full access to the department like I have. The ordinance allows for us to report on trends at the department, so we are allowed to take this sort of deep look. But I'm really hoping for someone to come on and look at everything from training, discipline, how we do IAs, how we do all of it, to look at that through an equity lens and see how we can improve. So that's one of the things I'm starting to finally get some traction on. And then also the ad hoc work is coming back this month. I'm going to have several meetings towards the end of the month. We have a couple different groups who are working on it. There's a group of me, the city manager, and the municipal court judge. And then there's also a sorting team that will be me, city manager, police chief, city attorney, employee resource center, sort of all those people who can look at those recommendations and just sort of sort them into who is the decision maker, what change would need to occur at what level for this to happen, and then we can get that information back to council so that council can make the decision on what they want to go forward with or not go forward with. I'm gonna stop there. Unless you guys have questions, because it's 7:54 and I want to hug my kids before they go to bed.
As always, if you have a question, you can always email Leah during the week or during the month.
Yes, or call or text. I think you all have my number at this point. You should. If you don't, I can send it out again. I am always here.
Email her for her number. Closing comments. We are running low on time. Bill, do you want to start us off? You are unmuted. Go ahead.
Just want to say thank you, everyone, for the discussion tonight.
Thank you, Ryan and Jason and Cindy, for being here. It's always helpful to have somebody from the department here to answer these sometimes tangential questions that we might have, and get the perspective that is helpful to kind of unknot some things. And thank you, everybody else, for chatting it away tonight.
Thank you, everybody. Still trying to figure it out. Gonna debrief myself after this and just, but it'll come, it'll happen. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for a good discussion. It's enlightening. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I likewise. I do think it was nice to hear. I think there's been a lot of conversation nationally about traffic stops and people from protected classes. And I know the last time I was acquainted with the Eugene stops data, there were not any kind of pattern or things were kosher with our stops data. And so given that, I think it's still good to look at some cases where there were stops involving people from protected classes and sort of hash through them. And I think it was really, really valuable.
All right. I don't think I have anything. Thank you all. I really appreciate that about this board, that we can have some disagreement and do it in a respectful and productive way. So I think tonight was a good example of that. I hope everybody feels that also. And on that note, we can adjourn, and we will meet again November 9th, 2021, and then again in December, and then a January break. I think Leah emailed about that. And if anyone has a problem with that being our break, then please reach out to her and let her know. So we'll see you next month. Thank you all.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Good night.